Amon. Amon. So as he was turning the ways of Judah, there was a pharaoh named Necho of Egypt. He was building an alliance with Assyria, and if successful, they would pretty much have world domination, these two alliances together. As Necho moved through the land of Judah, who Josiah was the king of at this time, Josiah tried to step in and stop Pharaoh Necho from coming in, and King Josiah ended up dying. So Josiah's son Jehoahaz became king, and he was appointed by the people of Judah. So Necho put Josiah's other son Eliakim as king, and he changed his name to Jehoiakim. Pharaoh Necho was not happy with the result with the new king that was appointed, so he basically took Jehoahaz to jail, where he ended up dying. So now Necho is in control of everything at this time. Jehoiakim is the king of Judah. Jehoiakim is under Pharaoh Necho's reign. So now in Babylon is going in 612 BC of Babylon, they defeated Assyria. They overthrew them. So in 605 BC, where this book begins, King Nebuchadnezzar is now king of Babylon and defeats Pharaoh Necho. So since Judah was under the reign of Egypt, Judah is now under the reign of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar would become a world leader, one of the most ruthless and most powerful kings of all time. Powerful except for Jesus Christ, of course. He killed a lot of people, he took a lot of lands, and he destroyed a lot of cities. So remember, the righteous kings were the ones who were trying to bring God's law back to the people and bring God back to everyone. And the evil kings were the ones who supported this idolatry. The Babylonians had a lot of idolatry going on. The Babylonians were the ones who worshipped a lot of different gods. Idolatry, good question. Idolatry is basically worshiping anything other than our God and putting these things before God. So if you, for example, modern day, if you decided to watch football instead of going to church because you wanted to catch your game, that's a form of idolatry. You're putting anything before God. So these guys worshipped many different kinds of gods. They worshipped, the moon god, the tree god, the god of learning, the god of this. And we all know that there's only one true God. Amen? Amen. So the evil kings were the ones who supported idolatry, and Babylonians had a lot of idolatry going on. So the god, they had god of this, god of that. They had the moon god. They had, like I said, they basically had all these different types of gods. So in order for King Nebuchadnezzar to get the people to cooperate with them, Nebuchadnezzar would allow these people to continue worshiping all of their idols in the lands of which he overthrew. He would take what he wanted back to where he resided in Babylon. What he did, like Ron mentioned, he would take the cream of the crop people back home and those who can contribute to his land. Among these people that he took were Daniel and 3 others, plus many others, but the main focus we're gonna focus on is Daniel and these 3. Does anybody know who the other 3 were?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?
That is correct. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are the names that were changed. So does anybody remember their first names? The names they had before they were changed? Joseph. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That is correct. Do you remember what those names mean?
No.
Does anybody remember what those names mean?
Mishael is who is what God is. Azariah means the Lord has helped me. And Hananiah means the Lord is gracious.
Yeah, so these were godly names. Daniel, my God is judge. Hananiah, Lord is gracious. Mishael, none is like God. And Azariah is, Lord is my help. These are all names that were given to them that glorify our God. So when Nebuchadnezzar would take these people back to his land, he would change their names to names that would be to worship their gods. So Hananiah, like Adam said, was later changed to Shadrach. Mishael was changed to Meshach, and Azariah was named Abednego. Shadrach means under the command of Aku. Aku is the Babylonians' moon god. Meshach means who is like Aku. And Abednego means the support of Nabu. And Nabu is the god of learning and the god of writing. Nabu. These names are actually in verse 6 of what their original name was, and then what the names that they got changed to. So Daniel's name got changed to Belteshazzar, which means Bel, protect his life. Bel was the main god of the Babylonians. So to change Daniel's name to say, you are the main god, protect this individual, basically they would change the names because these were godly names and they didn't believe in God, so they try to just change their names so they can change their nature, change their loyalty, change their way of living. And as I said in my last Bible study, you can change their names, but you can't change their nature. So just because you change their names doesn't mean you change who they are. So the king would make these people eunuchs. Now everybody remembers what eunuchs are, correct? Does anybody not know what a eunuch is? A eunuch are males who have been castrated, so they no longer have what it is that makes them males. Does that make sense? Okay. So the reason why they would do this was because they're bringing these Hebrew people to their land, and they don't like them. They own them, but they're not Babylonians. So they would make these people cut so they couldn't spread their seed to the Babylonians and mix their bloods. Also because it allows them to focus more. If they didn't have those parts, they'd probably be distracted with women, they'd be distracted with other things. So by taking their manhood away, it allows them to focus on what they want them to focus on, which is ways of learning. They brought them there, and they had about a good 3-year period to learn the language of Babylonians, to learn math, to learn literature, to learn the ways of them. And then after these 3 years, they were to be a part of the king's service. Now the king's service can be anything from the cook, someone who signs documents, military leaders, military people, advisors. I mean, you could even be the person who just picks up the dog poop. As long as it's the king's dog poop, you're part of the king's royal service. So that's a good little recap, kind of what I went over last Bible study. So I read verse 8 last time, and I went over it, but I'm gonna just read it and go over that, and then we'll all start on verse 9, okay? So verse 8 says, but Daniel was determined. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me forget one thing before I get into that. They gave Daniel and all these other people a ration of food. They gave them the king's food and the king's wine because the king wanted them built. He wanted them strong. So although these guys were prisoners in a sense, they were pampered. They were very well taken care of. They gave them the best education. They gave them best food. They gave them all these. Although they made them eunuchs, they were still pretty comfortable. So the king gives them, it says here in verse 5, the king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and they would and then they would enter the royal service. So when the king gave them this food that was really good food, you would have to imagine if it's the king's food, Daniel chose not to defile himself. Daniel chose not to eat the food, and so did the other three. And does anybody remember why I said he did not want to eat that food? For what purpose does it mean not to defile himself? Joseph?
During that time, according to the Old Testament, food such as pork, shellfish was considered sinful and impure to your body or whatever.
Yeah, that's good. Albert?
Because they were food offered to the idols, to the false gods.
Yeah, so Daniel wasn't, of course he wasn't aware of this, but what he knew was these people worship gods, sacrifice their things, so he would only assume that these foods might have been offered to the gods that are not his God, to these false gods. And he didn't want to disobey God by eating these false foods or these sacrificed foods. Not to mention in Leviticus, like Joseph said, there's certain things that you just can't eat. It's not God. And some examples like the types of insects. You can't eat winged insects that crawl on the ground. But you can eat winged insects that crawl on the ground but have legs that can make them jump. So